Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Martha Wright. I'm the Executive Director of the Worcester District Medical Society, and welcome to our second annual Med Moth program. There's a lot of people to thank, but I'll leave some of those thank yous for Eve and Allie. I'm going to introduce Eve and Allie to you. They were instrumental in organizing this. And thank you also to the UMass IT department for helping us with the technology. So Eve is a fourth-year medical student here at UMass Chan. She's originally from Nantucket and is applying to internal medicine residency with hopes of being a generalist. Outside of leading Med Moth, she spends time in her free time reading, cooking, and running. And our other organizer is Allie Wayne, and she's a first-year medical student from Lowell. Her interests outside of medicine are baking, running, writing, cuddling with her cat, Gabby, and spending time with her friends back in St. Louis. So welcome and thank you.
I think we're a little too tall for this. Yes, thank you so much, Lucas, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Med Moth. We are the UMass students who put on this event and have organized Med Moth for a number of years now. And it's hard to believe that this is our 14th evening together, and we really, really appreciate the support we've received over the last 5 years. Before we jump in, I want to make a few additional acknowledgements to our advisors, Dr. Mike Ennis, Dave Hatem, and Hugh Silk, as well as the Lamar Souter library staff. Everyone has been such a huge supporter of Med Moth over the years and really helped make this event possible. And then to Sean Boyden, who is our other co-leader who couldn't be with us this evening. Without him, this day wouldn't have been possible. And we especially thank the Worcester District Medical Society and Martha Wright for their sponsorship for this evening and for all the hard work that went into making it possible. And lastly, we're so grateful to the storytellers who have chosen to share their stories with us this evening. And
so our next speaker is Dr. Pugnaire. She has been a longstanding member of the UMass Chan faculty and the WDMS for over 35 years. She is now retired from clinical practice as a family physician caring for urban and rural underserved communities in North Worcester County. A graduate of the UMass Family Medicine Residency in Barre, she is now a UMass lifer and remains active in teaching UMass medical and nursing students, both in the classroom and abroad, with her global health work in the Dominican Republic. She is a passionate Moth fan and was proud to be one of the first speakers for the inaugural Med Moth program back in 2017. For her story tonight, she will build on the same theme as her Med Moth debut. With apologies to anyone here tonight who might recall her first story, she promises that this will be an upgraded version 2.0.
It's wonderful to be here live and in person. This is so good. So thank you all. And the nice thing about speaking first is that I can then thank Eve, Sean, and Allie for all they did, because you can't thank yourself. So let's give them all a round of applause. Okay. And with that, it's real an honor to be here, and one of my favorite shows on TV. So this is way better than NPR, because I know everyone in the audience, or many of you. So it is with humility that I offer my story tonight, because I had spoken on this topic before back in 2017, which was the first Med Moth. And here I have a couple of disclosures to make before getting started. It was back in 1981, this story about my first medical mistake, that I just became a licensed MD. 2 months after finishing my internship. You could get a license to practice after internship in those days, no residency required. And I was also, for the first time, unsupervised. I didn't have an attending looking after me, and I was wholly accountable for my my practice. And so I considered this my first medical mistake because I was solely responsible for it with no one supervising me. My practice at that time was in northern British Columbia. I took a year off after internship before studying a radiology residency and wanted to experience general practice. It's a remote area, about a 1-hour flight from Vancouver. This hospital was full service, staffed by general physicians like myself. We had one internist, one surgeon, and one OBGYN, and all the others were GPs. And another disclaimer, back in 1980, we never talked about medical error, and it was not addressed in our training, and we never talked about it with peers or with patients. It was the domain of lawyers and the process of litigation. So here's my story, and just a preface, it's going to be in 5 parts. And in each part, I'm going to share with you both my experience and the feelings that I was experiencing at the time, and I will end with some lessons learned. Here we go. Part 1, recognizing the mistake. My MD colleague asked me to care for his patient, mother of 3-month-old twin boys, while he was away. He briefed me on the boys, who were thriving, and the first-time mom, who was a worrier, anxious, needing lots of attention and reassurance. One night when I was not on call, she rang my home phone, concerned about her son, Robbie. He was fussy, irritable, wouldn't settle, kept on crying, and had no other concerning signs. Recalling my colleague's advice and feeling annoyed by her reaching out to me at home with my personal phone number and off call, I offered reassurance to say, call if things got worse, and I'll see Robbie tomorrow in my office. I started my office that next morning, having forgotten completely about Kathy's call, when my nurse asked me to see a sick baby right away. I recalled seeing Kathy with Robbie in her arms. Child was moribund and his body rigid with hyperextension in all extremities. I recognized this as the textbook image of advanced meningitis and realized at that moment the consequences of my mistake the night before. I recall telling Kathy that she did the right thing by bringing in Robbie and that he'll get the care he needs right away. My nurse escorted her to the hospital while I arranged medical transport to Vancouver Children's Hospital. I so clearly recall that process of discovery of my medical error, my feelings of shock, disbelief, panic, and fear, and the urge to flee. Part 2, caring for the patient. I knew what I needed to get done to best prepare Robbie for transport. With my heart pounding, I crossed the street to the hospital, trying to compose myself and stay focused on what I needed to do ASAP. I passed an MD colleague of mine who asked, "How are you? You don't look so well." I responded, "I need to do an LP on a 3-month-old with meningitis that I missed yesterday." His words offered empathy and comfort. It's happened to me, and it's happened to all of us. I'm on call today. Call me anytime. The PD nurse was experienced and knew just what to do. I thanked her for her help and shared, "Together we'll get this job done," and we did. I read the gram stain and confirmed pneumococcal meningitis, and still recall the microscope field as a sea of blue gram-positive diplococci. Knowing then the prognosis for survival was poor and the long-term risk for neurologic impairment was substantial, I continued to re-experience the night before and the consequences of my error. When speaking with the admitting pediatrician in Vancouver, he commented to me, "Such a great job for preparing Robbie for transfer." I shared that Robbie had been ill for 12 hours before I finally saw him. He responded, "We'll do all we can for Robbie." In the meantime, I cared for Robbie during this period, and what I recall most before the life flight arrived were the feelings of intense focus, accountability, and pressure to perform for the welfare of my patient. Part 3, hand off to others. I spent whatever time I could with Kathy, preparing her for transfer to Vancouver, Robbie's care plan, and offering whatever words of support I could think of. The time passed quickly, She flew with the medical transport team, and I can't recall our final parting words. Beyond saying, "I'm sorry," I offered no full apology and did not disclose my error of judgment the night before. After their departure, I felt a separation between me and my patients, leaving me adrift and purposeless, preoccupied with the thoughts of them both. There was no other option for me other than to be with them. So I got a last-minute plane ticket to Vancouver at the regional airport. And it was the last flight of the day. The plane was heading to the tarmac when I arrived, and I shared my story with the airline staff. They graciously allowed me to board the plane. My feeling during this time of separation from my patients were isolation, remorse, guilt, and profound self-doubt. Facing the aftermath. In Vancouver, I headed to Vancouver Children's Hospital, preoccupied with thoughts of, is Robbie still alive, leaving me fearful and apprehensive. I was too unsettled to use the elevator with other people, so took 4 flights of stairs to the PICU. Thoughts of seeing my former colleagues evoked in me shame and guilt with their judgment of me as the physician of this critically ill baby. I wondered what was written in the admitting note and where my name was noted as Robbie's PCP. I was shaking uncontrollably when entering the PICU. Immediately, my eyes made contact with Kathy's, sitting straight ahead near Robbie's crib, holding his hand. As I approached her, she stood and said, "Dr. Pugnaire, I can't believe you came all this way to be here." I responded, "There's no other place that I could be other than here." And at that point, tears streamed uncontrollably from my eyes, though I was not crying. Robbie had an intracranial pressure catheter monitor placed in his head. It's the only one I've ever seen real. All the others have been in textbooks. I spent time with Kathy in her vigil for Robbie, who remains stable, but still critically ill. His prognosis would still require days of care, and I returned back home after 2 days in Vancouver. Facing the aftermath of my mistake and the process of acceptance of the consequences took its toll on me. I recall feelings of apprehension, guilt and shame, and deep vulnerability with the unknown still looming ahead. Part 5. Long-term outcomes and the process of recovery. Robbie returned home after 4 long weeks in Vancouver. Miraculously, he survived his meningitis with no neurologic impairment post-discharge and in the following months. His hearing was intact. During this time, I was in close contact with his Vancouver MDs and kept our medical community informed. I did not speak about my medical error with colleagues or close friends, instead choosing to keep this to myself. Years later, I would recount my story to my students as part of their learning about the patient-physician relationship. Kathy returned to see me for her follow-up visit with Robbie, who was thriving. She thanked me again for, quote, being with me through all of this, unquote. It was then that I disclosed to her how much I regretted my error of judgment during her phone call. I remember saying to her that my delay in seeing Robbie caused him and her family unnecessary pain and hardship. I recall saying, "I'm so very, very sorry," time and time again. I said to her, "I also know that I would understand if you preferred to see another PCP until yours returned." Her response was, "You were there for me and all of us. That's what matters most." Thinking back to that long process of recovery, what I recall most are the feelings of grief, remorse, preoccupation with self-doubt, and above all, the healing power of apology. Epilogue. After Kathy's PCP returned, I disclosed to him the complete story, including the delay in treating Robbie. A few weeks later, after he had seen Robbie in his office, his PCP told me how well Robbie was doing and added that Kathy wanted to have me as her family's PCP. I cared for her and her family until I finished my one-year job as a GP in Northern Canada. Now for lessons learned. Number 1, never doubt a mother's concern. Listen and do not judge. Number 2, disclosure of our medical missteps to peers brings comfort and builds support. Number 3, accept your imperfections and know that your patients will judge you, not by what you do, but how you make them feel. Number 4, humble yourself and express gratitude to others in the moment, however small the gesture. And finally, trust in the healing power of apology for yourself, for your patients, and for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pugnaire. That was incredibly beautifully told, and so many lessons for us students and other listeners alike. Our next speaker this evening is Dr. Dave Hatem. We always joked that Dr. Hatem has very long introductions because he wears so many hats at the medical school and elsewhere. He's the co-director of the learning communities and a general internist at UMass Chan since 1988. He's always been interested in the intersection between the medical humanities and the practice of medicine, and has taught a writing elective to medical students since 1998. He uses narrative as a way to understand his own experiences, both inside and outside of medicine. Of his story, he shared, "The invitation to share a story came as we were preparing to have our 3 boys return home for Thanksgiving, a time I always hope to spend in conversation with our kids as they grow up. This led me to a story from a previous Thanksgiving and reminded me that relationships and life unfold according to a timeline I don't always dictate. I am certainly interested to see what that means." Welcome, Dave Hatem.
Thanks so much, Eve. And, you know, I made you guys wait too. It sounds like I got a text saying, "We missed you at Med Moth." And I said, did I not put this in my calendar right? So the name of this piece is called Waiting for Thanksgiving 2015. It was in the fall of that year at a high school assembly for parents, speaking with a school psychologist or some authority on adolescents, who said so clearly, "Just so you know, for your adolescent kids, everything you say is interpreted as judgment." And there we were in my sister's house at Thanksgiving, having arrived late, already at one other house with my in-laws, visiting with those energetic cousins, 6 and 4. We had now eaten one of those full Thanksgiving meals: turkey, vegetables, potatoes, stuffing, gravy, then dessert number 1, a slice of deep apple pie. As we drove to my sister's house, I looked in my rearview mirror and noticed one son asleep, one's head bobbing like typewriter keys, the third, the oldest, talking with his parents. We arrived a bit out of sync. Everyone was eating, no place left at the table, no place to sit, and yet not ready for dessert number 2. When dinner was done, people shifted, switching from eating to conversation. Some went to the next room to visit, and I found myself sitting at the main table next to my third son, head bobbing Jonathan. We were sitting there quietly when he looked up and said, "Hey, Dad, you know, I think I finally get that poem that you showed me about Earl." Recalling a night from maybe 2 months ago, showing him a poem about seals, watched from the shore by the people of the town as orcas repeatedly would rise up to grasp them in their jaws, killing them one after another. Yet the people of the town called all the seals Earl, and attempt to reassure themselves after each death that at least they didn't get Earl. So, Dad, it really seems that this is a story of the people's denial about what is happening right in front of their eyes. I was just thinking about that. Somehow he then jumped to A River Runs Through It, a book I had recommended he read since he was looking for something for his English class. And he goes on to tell me about his favorite part. He describes the part I am certain I know what part he is talking about. I look at the book later, certain that it is the part that says, "It is those we live with and love and should know who elude us." With a half memory of that phrase, I would only come to find later I looked at him, our more and more silent 15-year-old boy. And suddenly I realized that for this moment, we sat there, no longer the hunter and the hunted, the judger and the judged, but we were father and son, seeking understanding.
So our next speaker is Karen Rothman. Karen is a retired dermatologist and assistant professor of medicine and pediatrics at UMass. She has a long history of volunteerism and currently serves on the board of directors of several community organizations. Her interests include community education, swimming, hiking, cooking, and the creative arts. The lesson of her story is, the story is usually deeper than what we see.
She was in her early 20s when I first met her. She had come into my office concerned about acne that was worsening because she was stressed about planning her upcoming wedding. I took a look at her skin, and when I checked her back, I noticed that she had a lesion that I was very concerned about. So I finished the exam, sat down, talked to her about her acne, and then said, "You have a spot on your back that I'd like to do a biopsy of." And she was very concerned about the scar that I would cause by doing the biopsy because her dress was backless and her wedding was in 2 months. And she didn't want everyone staring at her scar when she was standing at the altar or dancing around the ballroom. She asked me if it was okay to wait a couple of months, and I told her that she could, but I really didn't recommend it because I was concerned that she had skin cancer, so she allowed me to do the biopsy. When she returned the following week for re-excision of what turned out to be a melanoma, she had gotten far past her original concern about what that scar was going to look like. And in fact, her mother-in-law-to-be had taken her shopping for a new wedding gown. I was very happy that her re-excision showed that the melanoma was quite early, and her prognosis was excellent. She had about a 97% chance of never having recurrence. So she came in to see me very regularly for follow-ups, and about 2 years after she had her follow-up exam, she said, "I brought my husband with me today." And those of you in primary care know you often curbside dermatologists, but there was the patient and there was her husband. She said, "He just has this spot on his cheek. Can you just take a quick look at it?" And I looked at the spot and I thought, I hope it's a cyst. I'm not sure if it is. And I injected it with cortisone and I said, "Please come back in 2 weeks so I can take another look." He came back in 2 weeks and the spot had doubled in size and he had 2 more. And I did a biopsy which confirmed my fears that he had metastatic cancer. In this particular case, it happened to be from a thymoma that had persisted since childhood, that had metastasized. He underwent very aggressive chemotherapy, and in spite of it, he succumbed a few months later. And you thought dermatology was only about acne. So I continued to take care of her. She continued to come in regularly for follow-ups. And one of her follow-up exams, it was about 5 years after I had first seen her, I was looking at her back, and all of a sudden, I looked at the base of her spine, and she had a tattoo. Now, I've seen a lot of tattoos, but this particular tattoo had 1-inch high black Hebrew letters. Now, Hebrew is a language that is predominantly spoken and read by people who are Jewish, and at least traditionally, people who are Jewish don't get tattoos. It's specifically forbidden in the Torah, the Bible. So it's not that people who are Jewish never have them, and tattoos are becoming increasingly common in our population now, and that certainly includes people who are Jewish. But it's still extraordinarily unusual for a person to have a tattoo written in Hebrew. So I stopped myself. I really got startled, and I stopped myself from just blurting out, like, do you know that there's Hebrew letters that are tattooed onto your back? So I finished the exam, I sat down, and I talked to her. Fortunately, she was still in excellent health, had no evidence of recurrence. And I said, I just want to ask you a question. Can I ask how you came to a decision of getting a tattoo? And she said, you know, I've just passed my 5-year mark, and I decided to take a long walk, and I kind of just decided that I really needed to do something different, that I was really stagnating, and I found myself in front of a tattoo parlor. And I just walked in, and the tattooist asked me, and she said, what do you want me to do? And she said, I don't know. And she said, well, what are you looking for? And she said, I need to make a change. I've had really bad things that have happened to my life over the last few years, and I really need to do something different. And then the tattoo artist began, and I don't even know if she knew exactly what she was putting on her back. She had no other tattoos, and I asked her, like, was the decision made to have this particular tattoo put on your back? And she said that she just really had nothing in particular in mind, that the tattooist had said that it had something to do with healing. So I had read the Hebrew word, and I asked her if she knew what it meant, or she remembered anything more about it. And she said she wasn't even sure the tattoo artist said anything, except it was something to do with healing. It would help her. So I told her, I said, well, this particular word that's tattooed on you is a word, Rifayenu. So Rifayenu is a Hebrew word, which means heal them. And the context, that it's only repeated once in the entire Torah, which is unusual. It's a lot of words in there, and most of them are written many times, but it's only said once. And the context is, it happens in Exodus, and Moses is wandering through the desert with all these Jews who have escaped Egypt. And he's with his sister, Miriam. And Miriam has the ability to find water in the desert. And one day, Miriam is struck with leprosy. And the habit of the community was, as if anybody got leprosy, they were separated from the community. She was banished for a period of time. So he prayed, and he prayed to God, and he said, heal her. And when the elders of the community came to see her, she was healed. And she was able to come back to the community. And this is, of course, very important, because it not only, hopefully he cared about his sister, but he also knew that without Miriam, the entire community would have been lost. So she joined the community again, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, if the patient then told me that this was going to be her last visit with me, she said she had decided to move back home. It was in another state, and she decided that she really needed to make a new start in life. And when I thought about this, I thought, if I were to design a tattoo that would be perfect for this woman, this was the tattoo that she needed. Her soul was in need of healing. Her body was fine at that point, but she really needed a way to go on. And I'm not sure how, with that 10 or 15 second exchange with the tattooist, she managed to figure out exactly what the right thing that this person needed was. Maybe she was an angel that was masquerading, that came down and placed it on her. I also thought that the location of the tattoo was very interesting. She put it at the base of her spine, which meant that she really couldn't see it unless she turned around and looked in a mirror and consciously looked for it, which meant that when she needed it, it was there, and it was always on her and with her from that time on. She also chose a spot where she had to choose to show it to other people. When she undressed and she was most vulnerable was the time that she felt comfortable to reveal that part of herself. Now, I've seen lots of tattoos in my career. whenever I've had to be alone in a room with a patient who had tattoos that depicted scenes of violence or related to gangs, it really frightened me. And as much as I tried to get beyond it, and of course did take care of the patient, I really could never see the patient in exactly the same way because I knew who they were, or at least who they once were. And it frightened me. Also, when of course, when I've seen tattoos with numbers, it immediately calls to mind all of the people who were branded during the Nazi regime. But I've also had occasion to see many beautiful tattoos, beautiful scenery, people that that are remembered and have such fond recollections. And I have come to understand that each tattoo represents something that's an essential part of the bearer. And each tattoo contains a story just waiting to be told.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rothman, for sharing your story. Our final speaker is Dr. Sabato. He has been practicing emergency medicine for 44 years and took an interest in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest early in his career. Prior to returning to UMass 8 years ago, he worked on cardiac arrest in the state of Florida and has continued this work since his return. His story will be about how saving lives is all in our hands.
Thank you. I'm honored to speak here 45 years after I first walked into this room. That's fantastic. And back when that happened, you would never know me now because I used to be so quiet and shy, no one would even know I was here. And there's two stories I'm going to tell that have been critical, but they're things that people can learn from. And the first one was my first job in emergency medicine, second job in emergency medicine was up in Derry, New Hampshire. And my first 5 months that I was there, every month I had to take care of another teenager that was killed in a car crash. At the end of the 5 months, and I knew some of the kids and their families. We used to get our Christmas tree from one of the families every year. And they were the same age as my boys. And so one day, after the 5 months, I'm sure I had post-traumatic stress disorder by that point. And I was starting to whine to one of my colleagues. So I'm very careful when I whine now because of this. So I'm whining to my colleague saying, somebody should do something about these teenagers. And she turned to me and she said, "You're someone." And that triggered me to call the police chief, who I had done some work with, and the medical examiner. And we agreed we were going to have a meeting to see what we could do, strategize-wise, to prevent further teenage car crashes. Meanwhile, it was just before Christmas, and then just after Christmas, I had signed up to run the Disney Marathon and took my family there. So we go there, and when I come back, I go to my office phone, and I have 100 plus voicemails, people wanting to come to Dr. Sabato's meeting about teenagers. So we show up at this meeting, and we had 50 state legislators from New Hampshire came to the meeting. We all worked together. In the state that is known by the statement, live free or die, all right? We had all these legislators. We were able to create, first of all, a world-recognized safe community program. And the second thing was, with the legislation, we were able to create the strictest child passenger safety law in the United States to age 18, in the only state that does not have an adult seatbelt law even today. And we saved scores of teenagers' lives. And so I'm no longer quiet and shy. I speak up for what I believe in. And one of the things, when I came back here 8 years ago, I volunteered to become the 911 medical director because I had done a lot of that work for the last 20, 30 years of my career. In Florida, we were able to double our survival from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, working with the 911 system. And so when, excuse me, when we started doing that down in Florida, one of the things that happened, because as EMS medical director, you also became the disaster medical director. And I would follow things like the Boston Marathon, which had written an article in the New England Journal of Medicine talking about how CPR was so important for runners who collapsed in races, their chance of surviving. And so I thought I was the medical director for the Gate River Run, which is the national 15K championship. I was also going to run the race. And so I reached out to my colleagues and said, you know, and we were a month before the Boston Marathon. So I said, we could become the first major race to teach CPR before the Boston Marathon does. So we can do this. And so we set up that we were going to teach hands-only CPR during the expo before the race, for the couple of days before the race started. So we did that. And then I run the race. And so this is a month before the Boston Marathon. I run the race. I get halfway through the race, and I come around a corner, and a woman is shooing people away because someone has collapsed. I go around her, and I go over to them, and there were two guys. It turned out they were Jacksonville paramedics that were doing CPR on this guy. They were running the race. And the guy, this has only happened to me a couple of times in my career, the guy would wake up during CPR. And we would stop CPR, and he'd go back out again because he didn't have a pulse. So this goes on for 5 minutes, and we're working together on this. The defibrillator comes, and we shock him. And after he gets shocked, he wakes up and says, I want to finish the race. And I said to him, no, you are getting into the back of that ambulance and you're going to the hospital. So then I finished the race with everybody else. And a couple of days later, I'm walking down the hall of the hospital, and one of the techs says, hey, that guy says he knows me. What guy? That guy you saved the other day. He wants to talk to you. What he wanted to do was he took all of the Good Samaritans out to dinner. He took us all out to dinner, all the people that saved him. And so he became the poster child for races throughout Florida, where he would be the person that everybody would go to learn that they should learn CPR at every race. And so that's what happened with that. So when I came back here, I asked for our survival data for cardiac arrest, and I volunteered to become the 911 medical director. When they handed me the results, I almost fell out of the chair. Our survival in Worcester for cardiac arrest is 3%. The national average survival is 10%. Our survival, and that's reflective of other places in Massachusetts, is the worst in North America. And so for the last 8 years, I've been conducting a campaign with the state to fix that. And we, thank God, because I did everything I possibly could except go to Charlie Baker's house with a blueprint on how he could fix it with his pen, and he refused to listen to me. And so what happened was when Maura Healey was campaigning in Worcester 6 weeks ago, her campaign was probably tired of hearing from Dr. Sabato about this. But she reached out to me And when I told her what was going on, she goes, "What?" I said, "Yes, we have the worst survival in North America." She says, "Well, I'm going to sign that legislation when I become governor." So I'm hopeful that she's going to live up to that with things. But a lot of the medical students have been working with me on this. And one of the things that we started, and this was something that one of my colleagues, Rob Goldberg, who's retired now, when I came back here, I told him what I was doing. And one of the things that I had started doing was teaching the people who have risk factors for cardiac arrest, their family and friends, what to do, which Rob Goldberg had been proposing that we do this and writing articles about this for 40 years. And no one would pay any attention to him. So he was so excited when he heard about me doing this, and we started doing this first in the observation unit at UMass in the emergency department for all of our patients who were getting stress tests. They were there for chest pain or what have you with things. And so we was teaching, and it only took 15 minutes to teach how to call 911, how to do hands-only CPR, and how to use a defibrillator. It's not rocket science. It's pretty straightforward to do that. So we did that. And and now Maura Healey's going to sign the legislation, and together with all the work that we've been doing with setting the world standard for healthcare to teach people with risk factors what to do and save lives. And we are going to save next year, for starters in Massachusetts, 500 lives. Because once we get to just the national average survival and fix the bureaucracy in Massachusetts, that's to me is only a start. Because first of all, I thank all the medical students who have been working with me in doing this on the cardiology floor. So the cardiology department has endorsed doing this. And so we are the only major medical institution that's doing this regularly now. But we already have saved a couple of lives doing this with things. So I want to thank all of you because you've been an inspiration to me. And my goal is to make us, because the best survival in the United States is Washington State and Seattle. They have 60% survival from cardiac arrest. So my goal is to make Massachusetts into the Seattle of the East, but with better weather. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabato. Very interesting, and I look forward to Worcester being the Seattle of the East.
So that's all we have for our Med Moth speakers today. Thank you so much to everyone who shared and everyone who came out. We had a great turnout and it was a great event. I think we all learned a lot and really enjoyed ourselves tonight. So thank you.
Thanks so much. And thank you to the Worcester District Medical Society.
Thank you everyone for coming. These stories were really interesting, powerful, and inspiring. Our next event, we're taking the month of January off. So our next event is our 237th oration. Dr. Ann Larkin will be our orator, and she'll be talking about what every medical student needs to know. Happy holidays to you all, and thank you for coming.